Hi everyone. So I've had a lot of requests from people, students of mine, looking to help out by making masks to donate to the hospitals for the coronavirus. And so I decided I'd put together a tutorial so that we can start working on this at home. It's actually something easy enough that the kids can do, or adults obviously can do as well. But even if you're a very beginner at sewing, you should definitely be able to do this. But that's why I want to put the tutorial together so that people of all skill levels can participate in helping out with this. You luckily do not need a lot of supplies, just scraps of fabric pretty much. The pattern is not that large, and elastic, either elastic cord or 1/8 inch wide thin elastic. So let's get started. So the pattern we're using for this project is from craftpassion.com, and the pattern does not include seam allowance. So I already have one that I did in the men's sizing, and I'm doing this one in the women's sizing. So I have cut it down to the women's size, but because the pattern doesn't have seam allowance, we do need to add that onto the pattern. Now I'm going to go ahead and add just 1/4 inch around the curves. Now this is my main fabric, this first one I'm doing, because the lining is done slightly different. So I will show you that as well. And the pattern you can just print online. There's a link for you, and you can just print it on 8.5 by 11 paper. There is a 2-inch guide on the paper, so you can make sure that it prints in the correct size. So just check that to be sure that it prints correctly. So 3 of the sides are going to have 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm just lining up 1/4 inch on the ruler with the edge of the paper, and then I draw over here, which gives me a line 1/4 inch away. Now on this edge over here, this straight edge here, this is the ear edge, and that edge on your main piece gets a 1 inch seam allowance. I'm going to show you what this is going to look like. Okay, so hopefully you can see it. I know the red's a little hard to see on the fabric, but you have a larger seam allowance on this side and a smaller border on the other sides. Okay, once you have that done, you can go ahead and cut that out. Now the lining fabric is going to be done in a very similar manner, but we are going to eliminate the seam allowance along the straight edge. So let's see if this piece fits here. We are good to go. Okay, so make sure you leave space for your 1/4 inch seam allowance on the other sides. And then now, you don't have to do 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you want to do a 1/2 inch or a different amount that makes more sense to you, that is also fine. But this will eliminate the need for trimming, and then it uses less fabric as well. So for this one, you can see that there is 1/4 inch, but then on this edge over here, we don't add anything extra. Okay, so go ahead and cut that one out. that. Okay, so the first step we're going to do is to sew this front curved edge here together. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pin that side together. And you just make sure the edges stay lined up. And now the fabric is inside out, right sides together, and that's how we want it. Do the same thing for the outside fabric here. I had some nice superhero scrap fabric left over that I thought was very appropriate for what we're making. So I have them pinned together. I'm going to go ahead and sew them up. Okay, so I have my machine threaded already, and I set it to 1/4 inch with the edge of the presser foot. I moved the needle over a bit to make it easy to sew along the edge of the foot. So if you're doing 1/4 inch seam allowance, you just want to look for where your 1/4 inch mark is on your machine to sew this together. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch a couple stitches and then back stitch to secure it. Okay, and then sew along that edge there. Bring up the needle and the presser foot, and then we can pull it out and cut those threads from both ends. Okay, and then we'll repeat that process to the other set of pieces. As you're sewing, you just want to make sure that the edges stay lined up. This is, in this case, is not a very large seam allowance, so you want to be careful. If you feel that your sewing isn't as precise, I was just doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You can always trim it down later. This will make it easier if you don't have the edges lined up properly. Lift up that needle and press our foot. Okay, so next we're going to press our seams, and I'm going to have you press them flat in one direction. I think this will give us better coverage than if we open the seam, and then we can top stitch it as well. So since this is a little bit of an awkward shape and I don't have my pressing ham at home with me, I am going to just lay the one layer flat on the board here, and then I'm going to use the tip of the iron and push in against the seam like that. Okay, and that then we'll press the seam nice and flat. So we're going to repeat that to the other layer of fabric. So once you have the seam pressed, we are going to top stitch it. Now this can be a little bit tricky of a step, so it's not totally necessary. I think it does look nice and helps it to lay flat, but certainly if you need to skip this step, that is not a problem at all. So I am stitching it so that it's going to catch the seam allowance. Okay, so my seam allowance is going in this direction towards the right here. So I am stitching to the right of the seam. And I'm just doing an edge stitch, so it's a very close stitch here. And since it's kind of like a curved shape, you have to try to flatten it out as you're sewing, keeping the seam underneath where you're sewing. Now I didn't even bother back stitching on this step because we've already secured the seam together, and this top stitching is going to get sewn over again anyway, so it doesn't really need to be back stitched. Okay, so that gives you a nice stitch along the edge like that. So we're going to repeat that to the other layer. Once you've top stitched both layers, if you choose to do that, we're going to put these right sides together so it's inside out, and sew along the top edge and the bottom edge. The sides are going to be left open. So we're going to line up the seams together here at the middle, Okay, so you can see the seams there lining up together. Now I purposely, when I pressed it, had one seam go one way and one go the other way. That way it's less bulky there and lays better. Again, not the end of the world if you didn't do that, but it does make it lay more flat there for you. Okay, so same thing on the bottom. We bring the seams together. Okay, and then we just continue to pin. Now you'll notice, if you remember from before, the one layer had the additional 1-inch hem on it and the lining layer did not. So that's why there's a difference here in the size. Okay, once you have this pinned together, you're going to go ahead and sew your 1/4 inch seam allowance along the top edge and the bottom edge. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and sew along the outer edges. I've already done the one side, and we'll do the other side. Back stitching, and you can see we're starting where the edges meet here, not at the beginning of the fabric. It's a little tricky because you have to keep the edges together and the fabric doesn't really want to lay flat since it's got shape built into it now. Okay, just snipping off my loose ends of thread. Okay, so then before we can turn this around the other way, we are going to clip our curves, okay? This is just gonna help it lay better when we flip it around. So where it's kind of curved here, we clip through the seam allowance, but you don't wanna cut the stitching. And this will just release the curve so it lays better and doesn't pucker when we turn it around the other way. Again, make sure you don't cut the stitching. Just little snips along the edge. And the bottom also could use, has that kind of upward curve here, so we could use some clips here at the bottom as well. Okay, and then we're gonna flip it around. Okay, and then next we are going to press the edges at the top and the bottom. Okay, so I'll show you that next. Okay, so when you press the edges, the important thing is that we get that edge pushed. I have my hand inside here, that I push it all the way up so it's flush. So the seam comes all the way up to the surface. Okay, we don't want to have the seam kind of tucked inside, like pleated in there like that. Okay, so make sure that seam comes all the way up to the surface like that, and then you're going to just press that edge flat over here, okay? And you're just going to want to continue to do that all the way around the outside of the mask. Okay, you will notice that when you press it, okay, that the edges here get folded back, okay? And that's correct, we want that like that. So what we're going to do next is we're going to top stitch along this edge and this edge, and that will also help to catch this edge and keep that folded back. So the top stitch can be an edge stitch like we did along the center seam here, just so right along the edge. Okay, so I'm going to line up here. And again, we don't really need the back stitching here. When you get to this middle section, because this kind of poofs up like that, what you can do is kind of push it inward like that, so it's like a bowl shape. And then you might want to hold it in front and behind to get it to lay flat. flat like that. All the way to the end. Okay, and then we're going to repeat that, some extra pins there, repeat that on the other side. Okay, so next we're going to take this extension here on the ends of this and we're going to create a hem. So we're going to fold it in 1/4 of an inch like this and press that first. So it's just a small turn to start. Okay, squished up a little bit there. All right, and then we're going to turn it again to cover that raw edge inside and create a little pocket there. Okay, so just like that, so it's a nice little clean hem. This is the outside, and this is the inside. So you fold it towards the inner fabric. And you're going to repeat that on the other side. Once you have your hem pressed in place, you're going to go ahead and stitch it down. Okay, so we want to sew close to this inner edge here so that we create a pocket here that the elastic can go through. So just try to get any raw edge up here poked in side. I'm going to put my needle back to a normal position here. Okay, we do want to back stitch there. Now it is fairly thick at that starting point, so if you have trouble getting going, just make sure that you, and it's getting stuck here because it's getting caught in the foot. I'm going to lift that up and there we go. But if you have trouble getting going, just try to push the fabric along the side to help feed it through. Okay, so just like that, we have a stitch along the edge and we have created a little pocket here, a little opening that we can put the elastic through. So repeat that on the other side. So one other thing I just want to mention, when you do that hem along the edge, you do want to make sure that you backstitch the beginning and the end because that is going to be a stress point with the elastic in there. So make sure you don't forget to backstitch there. So once that is done, we're going to use a safety pin and thread the elastic through this, and then I'm going to fit it to myself to get the elastic to the correct size before finishing it, and that will be done. Okay, so once you have those hems done, we're going to go ahead and put the elastic through the ends. So I put elastic through this end already and fit it to my ear where I think it should be. I'm going to do it through the other end. So we put a safety pin on the end of the elastic and then push it through the tunnel. So just kind of squish it on and pull through, push and pull until it comes out the other side. I'm going to remove that safety pin. Okay, then we'll take this end here. Now I am using just an 1/8 inch wide thin elastic here, which is actually, I think, pretty good because it's not, it's comfortable. It's not irritating, super irritating. Okay, so you want them both to be the same size. Give it a try. Okay, so that's a little bit loose. So I'm going to try securing it, knotting it a little further in on both sides so it's equal. You might hear my kids laughing in the background. They've been very good so I can make this video. Okay, try that again. Okay, so that feels like a better fit. Okay, maybe make it just a teeny bit tighter. Okay, then what we'll do is we'll cut off the extra elastic and we can hide that knot in the inside of the hem. So once I finish this, I will give you in the directions my what finished measurement this was, but it depends a lot on the elastic that you're using and on how stretchy it is. So I think testing it out on yourself is a good way to do it. Let's see. Okay, so that works good. Okay, so we're going to cut off the extra elastic right there. Now I have a couple knots there, so it should not come undone. Same thing on the other side. And then I'm just going to kind of pull that knot so that it goes back inside. My kids are having a good time in the other room. Okay. So like that way it's hidden inside, and then we're all done.